Hello, Ed. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi there.
Today's guest is UK artist Ed Fairburn, and I've been a fan of his work for a while now. With clients like Nike, BMW, British Airways, and Penguin, clearly his work is sought after and respected by both his followers and many brands. Ed's art combines topography and pointillism. You gotta check it out because it's mind-blowing. And before we start, Ed, where can people learn more about you?
So the best place is probably my website, edfairburn.com, or alternatively, it's actually being kind of revamped at the moment, but it should be done very soon. Instagram, social media, or physically seeing my work in person. I have work at A-Bend Gallery over in Colorado. And yeah, I'd say that's pretty good roundup of where you can see my work. I'd say kind of Instagram is the most obvious place.
Fantastic. And listeners, connect with Ed, and I appreciate if you hit the subscribe and like button for our show. So Ed, where do I begin? I have tons of questions, but let's start here. I mentioned your art style on the intro. Your art combines illustrations with geographic maps, but in your own words, I'd love for you to describe your own art.
So I suppose I try to essentially use one language to kind of show something else, and I'm really interested in the language of cartography, kind of details of maps and the information that maps show. It's kind of using a pre-existing pattern and altering that pattern to show something different. And really it's anything organic, more or less, but my main interest is portraits, is drawing people. It always has been. So that's it's kind of a clash of interests for me. It's kind of an interest in maps and cartography and portraiture. I suppose I always describe my work as drawing with the map rather than drawing on the map. It's all about using that information that's already there, just making slight alterations to it. So I kind of try to respect the patterns and how the information that the map shows already. I sometimes think of what I do as kind of like a hijacking of information. So I'm essentially hijacking the information on the map so that it still shows its original information, but the agenda is just slightly changed to kind of work in my favor.
So this is a typical question I ask artists on the podcast, but out of all the different ways to express yourself visually, how did you particularly find this unique art style?
It was really, I suppose it was an extension of what I was doing at uni. So when I left university, it was about 9 years ago. It was 2012, I graduated. I was really interested I've always been interested in portraiture. I've always been interested in drawing people. Just find that particularly interesting. But when I left uni, around about the same time, I was really kind of looking at context, and I had quite a strong interest in kind of not just drawing on kind of paper or drawing or painting on woods, canvases, that sort of thing. I was kind of looking at other sort of channel or situations where I could actually place my work that maybe interacted with that situation in a particular way. So I was really interested in doing something to do with postal art at the end of my degree. And postal art was it was illustrating envelopes and drawing on envelopes, postcards, things like that went through the postal system. And it was really a way of using that particular channel as a kind of outlet for sharing my work. So when I left uni, I still had that interest in drawing and painting on things that weren't kind of, the everyday, sort of paper, that sort of thing. I suppose it was kind of, it always felt somewhat kind of off-road, it was always interesting, like finding different surfaces to work with. And for me, working with maps, it was kind of a coincidence of that particular interest, and also working the patterns. I essentially started looking at cartography one day, and I just kind of wondered. I was looking at the patterns and everything, And I just kind of wondered if I could apply some kind of drawing discipline to that cartography to basically preserve the existing pattern, but also kind of bring out my own interest from that kind of surface, which was and always has been portraiture. So yeah, it was a melding of all of those things, really. Yeah.
Let me ask this question because I went to school and studied graphic design, but so I'm always curious about learning fine art in a university. So if I'm understanding you right, you went there to learn different techniques, but you didn't really find your style until you left school?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, I actually did illustration at uni. I didn't do fine art. There were many times as well, and I actually thought I should probably be doing fine art because I was never really that into a lot of what the other people on my course were doing with illustration. I always struggled to kind of draw from, imagination. I always struggled to kind of work with some of the briefs that we were given. And I kind of had like a lot of friendships with the people that were in the kind of adjacent course, which was fine art. And I guess I had kind of different preconceptions of what fine art was, what illustration was. But a lot of the people doing fine art at uni, they were really just straight up painting and doing a lot of drawing. And I kind of envied that a lot of the time, but I was quite lucky because my illustration course, it was very flexible. I had really nice course leaders who were very much kind of into giving us the space to kind of explore our own interests and things like that. So, I actually came from an illustration background.
Forgive me with this question because it might sound silly, but in the UK, is it difficult to make a living solely by your art? I would assume it's just like the United States. I mean, some people graduate the university and they have to work a part-time job in relation to being a full-time artist. Is that typically I'm guessing it's the same in the UK, correct?
I would say it's the same, yeah. Just simply because I think that geography it's kind of somewhat irrelevant. I'm sure lots of people would disagree with this, but I think it's somewhat irrelevant now in this kind of age. I think I kind of went into this kind of real world at sort of, a very kind of poignant time. It was kind of social media was just taking off. And, now these days, I mean, I work with people from all over the world. My income is in, various different currencies. I actually, I would say not even half of the people really that I work with are actually UK based. So I think that, I mean, it's not really answering your question about whether it's difficult or not, but I would say that it's just as challenging in the UK than it is in the States, or just as not challenging, if you like. But for me personally, I think, it does present certain challenges. It's, it can be inconsistent, when you're working as a freelancer doing anything really, whether it's, art or any other field of work. It's not always about kind of the amounts of money you make or, what you do with that money, like whether you can support yourself. I think it's the psychology of it always having that question mark, for the following month or year. I think you just have to kind of celebrate it while it's there, make the most of it while it's there. For me personally, I graduated, as I said, in 2012, and I had been working part-time all through my uni course at a job that I didn't really like, and I was kind of just stuck there. And when I graduated, I made the choice to quit that job, even though I didn't have anything lined up at all. I just kind of wanted a fresh start. And, it might have seemed like a kind of silly idea at the time, but it was important to me to kind of just, have that clean slate because I'd been there for a long time. And when I graduated, I was kind of trying to, I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really kind of know what I was doing with my sort of artwork or anything like that. But I was trying, I was trying to make something happen. I was renting a studio space not far from where I lived. And at the same time, I was trying to find work as well, basically, full-time work at that point. And later that year, I basically, I got a job, basically doing the same thing that I did previously, which was working in a cafe. And I was really happy with that job. I actually really liked it. I really enjoyed the people that I was working with. I enjoyed everything about that. I enjoyed the way I was treated as an employee. But around about the same time, I started playing around with maps, and that kind of took off pretty much overnight for me. I was, I think I was quite fortunate because, I suppose nowadays it's much easier for that sort of thing to happen. But I was quite surprised at, the first iterations of kind of work that I did with working with maps and portraits. And it was pretty much an overnight thing. Within a couple of weeks, I kind of had some first commissions lined up. I'd been featured on a couple of blogs and pages that I was always familiar with. I always wanted to kind of be a part of. I always wanted to be featured on those sorts of pages. And yeah, I was quite surprised. So I actually quit that job about 2 weeks later. I was working there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And yeah, I left that job, and it was quite difficult because, as I say, I really enjoyed it. And I might have done so kind of a bit prematurely, but that is basically what I did. And I've done this ever since. I basically formed a business from there. And yeah, for the last 8-9 years, that's the only thing I've done. So, it's been kind of patchy at times, but like overall, I'm happy with what I do. And I don't really have a whole lot to compare it to in terms of difficulty with making a living from it. It's just the thing that I've poured all of my energy into. So, I guess to answer your question, if it's challenging here, it's also challenging in the States and vice versa. I think it's challenging anywhere. But certainly today, it's much easier. I think with the internet, with, communicating cross borders, things like that, being able to share work so openly, I think it's a lot easier than it would have been 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I sometimes wonder what my job would be like, without the internet. I'm sure lots of people my sort of age do wonder that. I just can't picture it,
So one of the reasons I wanted to spotlight you is because I believe there are many people out there that think an artist whose work needs to almost conform to something safe, maybe commercial, to be able to work with big corporate brands. Your work is the opposite of that for me. It's clever, it's unique. Your style is, obviously uncompromising. Were you afraid yourself that your art would not lend itself to these big brands that I mentioned earlier?
No, I think it's kind of, for me, it was very much all backwards. I think that I was never thinking about that kind of thing when I approached this sort of work, and when I started doing this kind of work. I suppose, I started producing prints. My aim was always to kind of work in the kind of gallery sort of setting. But I think for me, it's kind of happened the other way around. I think it's that kind of uncompromising nature and that kind of, that uniqueness that's probably why I think a lot of people kind of have reached out and worked with me, just simply because it's something different. It communicates a kind of concept that works for a lot of the clients that I've worked with. And yeah, I think it was never that first. I think for me, it was always about the artwork, and it still very much is about the artwork. I've often thought about the duality of what I do, kind of working with, kind of in the gallery scene, but also working with a lot of commercial clients. But there are lots of artists out there that do that. Lots of artists that I look up to that, have been role models for me throughout, my student days and going through even through to my career. So I think that's absolutely, I think that's absolutely fine. And it's very much the other way around for me. I kind of did the other one first, and then kind of, was surprised when people wanted to work with me, but I've not really changed anything. It's what I do is what a lot of those clients kind of buy into. So yeah, that's kind of the situation there, really.
And just to be fair, I named just a few of your big corporate clients that worked with you. And I would love to know, how did they find you? Do you find them? How does the work initiate? How's the connectivity? Like, do you send them your portfolio? Did they just reach out to you? How do you connect with such big brands?
It's usually the latter. I've worked with a number of agencies in the past, but usually it's very much kind of like the flow is very much kind of from them to me. I've worked with a lot of brands directly. I've also worked with a lot of brands kind of through agencies, whether they're kind of big ad agencies or even just individuals. And it's the dynamic is always, it's quite different. Working with brands directly is, it's always different from kind of working with brands through agencies, and it can be different in good and bad ways. Kind of on both sides really. So yeah, it's usually a case of kind of people reaching out to me, and I usually ask kind of about my my time scale, what my process is for doing commissioned work, that sort of thing, what my fees are, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's usually how it goes really from there.
Yeah, let's piggyback on your process, because I'm curious, because I see these geographic maps. I would assume if you're painting a portrait with that map, am I assuming that there's a relationship there? Meaning if you're illustrating like a person, that person and that map, are they from that area?
Honestly, no. Sometimes that is the case. I work with, like some of the private commissions I do. Very often that will be kind of like geographically relevant to, the person that I'm drawing. And, I can be, like the private commissions I do, I can be quite selective only because, people have such specific ideas for what they want to create over a particular landscape. And for me, what I do, I'm essentially harmonizing those two things. So, I can be quite selective about the photography that I use, that I work from, because I do work from photography. And sometimes it doesn't really happen very often, to be honest, but sometimes there are places in the world that I literally just can't work with because there isn't the kind of topography there, whether it's, physical kind of like elevation, it's not like a hilly landscape, or there's no roads there. I've worked with deserts before, and that's quite difficult. It's quite a challenge. So yeah, so I would say for most of my work, there isn't really a real connection there for my self-initiated work. For me, it's mostly aesthetic, but I mean, you could kind of think of it in a wider sense. My kind of wider concept with what I do. The kind of harmonization that I seek to achieve between, kind of person and landscape, it's kind of a bit more than a visual thing. It's quite symbolic. It kind of says a lot about, where we live and the fact that we are a product of the landscape. And in many ways, the landscape is a product of us, which is kind of sad in these days because, it's kind of all going wrong. But it's, I suppose in that sense, yeah, we're all connected to whichever landscape, whichever landscape it is that's covered. But I suppose in a more kind of fine-tuned sense, I would say for certain commissions, yeah, they're very much relevant to the places they occupy. And I only pursue that kind of thing. I'm only able to kind of do certain things like that, fulfill kind of certain briefs or carry out certain commissions if it works, and there's quite a long process of actually kind of playing around with, roughs and seeing what can work with the particular imagery that I work with and the particular place, I think some people often think that, I see a face in a landscape, like, I never know how to pronounce it. I think it's pareidolia. It's kind of like when you see faces in clouds.
Yeah.
And that's it's not really so much what I do. I kind of sort of do it to an extent, but I'm usually kind of looking for a kind of best fit. And there are kind of all sorts of amalgamations per map and per portrait that I work with. It's very much finding something that can work. It's kind of not just, pieces of a puzzle fitting together. It's kind of like, all these pieces can go together in one way, but they can also go together in another way. So, and that can be frustrating, actually. I kind of, sometimes when I'm working on something, I kind of think, maybe it should have been more like this, or, so I kind of just look for that framework, really. And, so I think for, some things it's very much about the person, very much about the landscape, but Other times it's very much just an aesthetic thing and kind of about the wider concept.
And Ed, if somebody's a fan of your work, can you just walk us through the process of doing a commission? Do they just reach out to you through your website, through Instagram, and then you brainstorm with that person? How long does the process take? Is it months? Could you just walk us through a commission?
Yeah, sure. So I can be reached on Instagram, by email. Some people just phone me up directly, which is fine. And yeah, so usually people tend to kind of inquire with some basic details about the kind of thing that they have in mind. And, I would broadly split my commission inquiries into two. I would say, a portion of the inquiries I deal with are kind of more commercial based, kind of working with particular brands. And those sorts of clients, they kind of tend to be a bit more, they're kind of used to dealing with artists and illustrators and designers, and they're kind of a bit more forthcoming about, kind of what they want, what they need, what their process is, and then they kind of see if my process fits in with that. Whereas, private commissions that come in, it's usually very much about a particular individual, maybe a life story or a portion of a life story, a particular event that's important to the person, a particular place. And usually I just kind of try to get some information about the location, or the locations of interest. That's obviously quite important. And, I try to see kind of, what is available there in terms of the maps, because that's something that I do, that's part of my process is actually sourcing the maps and seeing what's available, what's available to use. So, that's quite a fun part of the process as well. It takes quite a long time to do. I say quite a long time. It's in relative terms, it doesn't really take that long at all. But, I look through like a number of places. There's all kinds of places that I look for maps now. And, I've got my own collection, which it's just ever growing. It grows faster than I could ever dip into it, really. And I suppose it's important to say as well that a lot of what I do, it's kind of born from that interest in maps. I've got maps here. I collect sort of, maps and documents that I will never use, and I just want them because I like them. I think they're interesting. I think they capture a particular kind of point in time, and they're just interesting. And I'll never have a use for some of the things that I work with. But yeah, I think that's really important. But generally I look for the maps as well, and from there, I kind of do like roughs and things like that. And I kind of try to offer like a number of options for whoever I'm working with, really. And yeah, it kind of goes from there, really. It then actually develops. The actual work tends to develop.
And I'm just curious, how do you price your work? Is it by the hours you put into that piece? Is it the size of the art? Is it the difficulty? Like, how do you price it?
So there's sort of three main factors for pricing for me. The main one ultimately is the size of the map. And that's kind of, in many ways, that's very much out of my hands. It's a lot of the time it's kind of just, what's available. That being said, I do work with high quality reproductions as well. I work with a lot of kind of digital kind of archive maps that come from various archives. And obviously when I'm working with those, the sizing can be flexible. There's often kind of like a true sort of scale, or like a kind of original scale for those maps. But those sorts of maps are essentially made in the same way that my giclée prints are made. And, they're very high quality reproductions, but that's kind of one half of the kind of offerings that I have in terms of the maps. The other half, I suppose the more interesting half is actually original maps, real antiquated maps with, folds and that kind of old paper smell, that kind of thing. And it's very much out of my hands there in terms of sizing. So what I try to do is I try to offer like a number of options so that I can hit like a number of price points for a client, whether they want something kind of small or big. Sometimes small maps actually contain a lot more detail than large maps as well. So complexity does come into it. I'm thinking kind of like, lots of maps are kind of like wall charts, old kind of school maps, that sort of thing that were originally put on walls, that sort of thing, like big, on a big scale. And they tend to be quite simple. You can kind of see the details from like a distance. Whereas things like atlas maps, atlases are tiny, but they're designed to pack such a huge amount of information in such a small space. So, complexity definitely comes into it. So there's size, that's a factor. There's complexity. And there's also usage as well. The actual usage of the work comes into play when I talk about pricing. If I'm talking about kind of like a private commission, something that's going to hang in somebody's home, then, the pricing is usually kind of on the lower end compared to, something that is going to be used for like an ad campaign or, by a particular brand. So, yeah, those three things I would say: size, complexity, and usage is how I price my work. Not hours. I don't really tend to price my work by hours, and that can be down to the unpredictable nature, of what I do. Some things take much longer, and other things don't take as long. And I kind of just bite that bullet really and just kind of go with it. I kind of have a rough idea of how long things are going to take, but there is certainly an unpredictable element there.
Your work is so amazing, and this question just popped in my head. Do you ever get like friends and family just trying to get you to give them a gift of an art piece of them, like a portrait of them? I hope not, because that could be kind of tough. But I mean, it's so dynamic. I'm sure everybody would want to have one of these.
Yeah, my mum's been waiting for an original for quite some time now. It's actually. It's coming up to Mother's Day as well. It's Mother's Day, like the day after tomorrow here, which is, I think we have a different Mother's Day to you guys in the States. And I've been working on this thing for her for like the past, I don't know how long, like the past year maybe. And I've been promising her something for a while, and it just feels like, it sounds awful to say this because, she's my mum, but it just feels like there's never time, I'm always doing this other stuff, but really I should definitely make time for stuff like that. It's really important. But yeah, generally I've done commissions for kind of friends and family before. Certainly for family I have. And yeah, it's slightly different because you've got that kind of, that dynamic of like knowing the person. I think I prefer to work with people that I don't otherwise know. And, that's partly because I actually kind of enjoy working with people that I don't know. I enjoy kind of like forming those sort of working relationships. I think that's quite interesting. I meet all sorts of people doing this line of work, and it's really interesting. So, yeah.
I wanted to ask this question because a lot of artists are always curious about the strategy on how to grow your brand. I think you said you were represented by an art gallery. I'm not sure if festivals are popular in the UK, but do you have a specific strategy on how to grow your audience, or that just happens organically for you?
I think for me, I suppose a lot of it's happened organically. I think I've over the years I've submitted my work a lot to a lot of kind of blogs and art magazines, that sort of thing, publications. And that's really because I probably never would have really done that had it not been for having my work shared by those sorts of publications in the first instance. When my work kind of took off in 2012, and I was really surprised because kind of thinking like I wasn't expecting it basically. So that kind of gave me the confidence to continue to submit new work to those sorts of places. And that really helps. That's like a really big boost, kind of get your work seen by a lot of people. And it's free as well. It doesn't cost anything to send your work to a magazine that might print it. So I think that was quite important. But I think other than that, no, there's no real kind of strategy. I suppose I work with a lot of popular locations, I would say, in terms of like the actual kind of maps that I work with. I've noticed that some of the locations that I work with just because I want to work with them, just from a visual point of view. They might be, the middle of nowhere up in, Scotland or just somewhere that nobody's ever heard of before. And those pieces don't really tend to carry a lot of weight. People I have to remember that people love the locations that I work with as much as they're into what I do. The people that like my work, it's a lot of it. It's about liking the map and the location. So I think working with prominent places, that certainly reaches a lot more people. That carries a lot more weight. So, but in terms of a brand, I just kind of do what I do really, and I'm aware of what is successful. I'm aware of what people like, and I kind of try to take note of that. But at the same time, I try not to kind of fold into that too much, because you want to be your own entity, right? You want to kind of do things that you're not just doing things for other people all the time. You kind of want to do things because you want to do them. So it's kind of a mix of everything, really. It's kind of everything in measure, everything in balance, I suppose.
So, Ed, we're near the end of the show, and I'm going to ask you some questions a little more personal so the audience gets to know you better.
Yeah. So,
which artists are you inspired by? Is there anyone that we should follow on Instagram that you follow?
I'm inspired by kind of different artists, I suppose, for different reasons. And actually, a lot of the artists that I follow, our work is not really alike, but there's still something about, those artists that kind of resonate with me. So I actually follow a lot of kind of photography accounts on Instagram that are kind of about, I don't know really how to describe this, but they're kind of about the night. They're kind of about kind of lone lights in the night, and it's this kind of kind of film noir kind of aesthetic, but for the 21st century, I suppose. It's kind of this eerie sort of, it kind of matches a lot of the music that I listen to. I listen to kind of a lot of like jazz noir, doom jazz, that kind of thing. And I find it kind of strangely comforting. My partner, it kind of drives her a bit nuts. She finds it quite heavy and quite ominous, but there's a couple of accounts full of that kind of photography. One is called Cinesomnia, as in insomnia, but with cinema at the front, like cinema, Cinesomnia. Another is Dark Shine magazine. They're kind of they sort of feature that kind of aesthetic. And there's a lot of visual artists, like kind of painters, that tap into that kind of doom sort of aesthetic, dark suburbia, kind of lone lights, at the night, sort of after hours. One of my favorites is illustrator called Nicholas Mowgli. Moegly, Nicholas Mowgli, and he does some really cool, kind of really dark stuff, showing kind of suburbia, but it's all very kind of strangely comforting, And I suppose looking at all of that work, you wouldn't necessarily make a connection with my work, but it's just what I enjoy to look at, really. It's just kind of something that resonates with me. And I suppose there's another artist that really kind of I really respect at the moment, who he's inspirational, because I used to think that up until fairly recently, actually, the most epic artwork, the most impressive stuff that I could possibly pull off has to be on a scale, like has to be big, working with huge maps, like lots of detail in these, wall-sized charts, filling wall space. But there's an artist I follow on Instagram. I know I'm going to have trouble pronouncing his name. It's a guy called Anthony Waichulis. I have no idea how to pronounce his name. It's Waichulis, Anthony Waichulis. And he's kind of like a sort of trompe-l'oeil painter. He does really impressive stuff, but on a really small scale, like insanely small. And he's kind of, following his feed over time, it's kind of teaching me that epic is not necessarily huge. It can be very, very tiny, and there's a lot of potential in terms of detail locked away in the smallest of spaces. You just have to have the right tools. You've got to have the right kind of patience. And that's really interesting to me, because there's a lot of maps that I work with that are very small. They're very tiny. They're like atlas maps that, are barely legible, really, in terms of the size of those. So more and more I've been working on a smaller scale, which is, it's quite exciting to do. And he's somebody that kind of has shown me that that's very much worth doing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing me and our audience those artists. We'll definitely check it out. What do you want to accomplish in the future that you haven't accomplished yet?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I kind of felt like, I suppose for a long time, I kind of have a lot of that stuff figured out. But in many ways, and I don't know if I find this kind of comforting, if this is like a good thing for me or not a good thing. But in many ways, I kind of just want to carry on. I kind of look for new challenges because I'm pretty happy with where my practice is at. I'm happy to be able to support myself and just kind of exist comfortably and explore the things that I've always wanted to explore day in and day out. And, sometimes it scares me just to think I've just got to carry on with that. Just a case of rinse and repeat. I kind of want something to aim towards, but the honest answer is I'm just not sure. I don't really know. I think I just want to, I want to carry on working with lots of other individuals and kind of, work around the world, do kind of various exhibitions, that sort of thing. But kind of really just the short answer is, just rinse and repeat, really. I'm just kind of, I feel comfortable with where I'm at. And like I say, in a way that's kind of very uncomfortable, being comfortable, but it is what it is. And that's where I am. So I wouldn't say I have any huge goals for the future, but yeah, just kind of carry on, really.
What advice do you tell young artists who are fans of your work and they want to follow your footsteps?
I would say, I think a lot of the time just pursue what you want to pursue and don't kind of feel like you have to fit into too much of a mold, looking at what other people do. I would also say kind of, be prepared for, a lot of failure, which is a bit of a cliche. And I think we all know that, the path to doing this sort of thing, it's never a straightforward one. There's lots of dead ends and there's lots of turning around and trying different things. And in many ways, it's kind of frustrating because they're the biggest learning curves. When things go wrong, they're the times when you really learn about, what you're doing and kind of what you can do, really. But yeah, I would say kind of be open-minded, try new things, just kind of really kind of go after what it is you enjoy doing. And also, it does, in a practical sense, it does help to have some kind of business acumen, I suppose. Doesn't need to be anything too over the top, but just a sense of how to run a business in a basic sense is really important. There are lots of really skilled artists out there that they might not be where they want to be. And I think a lot of the time that's because they're not marketing their work right, or they're not kind of sort of listening to what comes back, and following the things that is working, or, ignoring the things that aren't working, or asking why certain things aren't working. And they're all just elements of running a business, really. It could be any business. It's not necessarily art. It's kind of going with what works and working out why it works and trying to replicate that. And I think for an artist, I think that's quite difficult, that balance, because you, as I said earlier, you don't necessarily want to do something all the time that is just to please other people. You kind of want to please yourself as well. And I think that is the most important thing. I think ultimately pleasing yourself, if you can find something that you are really passionate about visually, or, with a theme that you're exploring, or any kind of like style, if you like, that you're kind of playing around with, the rest will follow. People will tap into that. People will kind of see that enthusiasm, and it will kind of get you to where you want to be. But you've kind of got to be alert, I think, to kind of what is working and what is not working. So the other thing as well, I think is really important actually, is a lot of advice contradicts other advice. It's very difficult to give advice because, apart from anything, I'm learning still, we're all learning still, but it's so much of it is contradictory. Somebody could tell you one thing and the next artist will tell you, no, that's completely wrong, do this instead. And it all contradicts, everything. So just find what works for you. Be perceptive of that. Always evaluate and carry that forward, and be prepared to adapt.
Great advice. I have a couple more questions, Ed, and we'll be done here. And this question just popped in my head. I've never asked this before, but when you were a student at the university, I've always wondered this. I don't know how am I going to phrase this question. Did your professors or teachers, did they have any inkling that you were going to be this popular or this successful? Have you ever gone back to speak to them and tell them, what you've been doing, or do you just graduate and you never look back?
No, I'm still in touch with. I'm still in touch with some of my professors now. We kind of follow each other on Instagram. And when I left uni, when my work with maps kind of started to sort of take off, if you like, when I started to kind of explore more in that and kind of turn it into a business, I did go back and I did seek advice from them. And, that was really helpful. But I'm not really sure that, I'm not really sure that they kind of had, any kind of inkling. I mean, I didn't really sort of know, I think it kind of went in a weird sort of way for me because, I always wanted to do something big with art. I always wanted to kind of like do something quite successful with art and illustration. And that's how I ended up in art school. But I think I kind of went on this sort of course of reality, if you like, when I graduated, when I realized like, oh, this is what the real world is like, I've got to get a job now, and I kind of in many ways, I wouldn't say I gave up on myself, but it kind of sort of went on the back burner for a little bit, and things kind of then, at just the right time, they kind of started to pick up again because, luckily I did kind of stick with it. So I think, I guess what I'm saying is that, it's a bit of a roller coaster. And I think at times when I was a student, I was really not engaging with a lot of what I was doing. I actually retook one of my years in uni as well. It was supposed to be a 3-year course. And I was one of, I think, 3 students in the class of about 30, 40 students that retook the year. And that was simply because I just didn't pass. I didn't tick the right boxes. And, I kind of could have scraped it, but I actually kind of opted to retake the year. I thought it would be a good idea to do that. And I'm really glad I did because it kind of gave me the time and the space and the ability to kind of step back and think to myself, I can't carry on like this. I've got to be, I was always interested in drawing. I was always interested in, the work, the artwork. It was just, as I say, I just wasn't ticking the right boxes, really. So I think some of the times I frustrated my professors in uni. But, I think they were always happy with the work that I did. And certainly, after graduating, I stayed in touch with them and I'm still in loose touch with them. So that's good.
Fantastic. And finally, Ed, how do you personally define success?
So personally defining success, I think for me, it's certainly changed for me over time. I think there was a time, maybe not going back even that far, maybe sort of 10 years ago, it was kind of a big driver when I left uni. Around about that time, sort of as a student as well, a lot of my work was kind of motivated by wanting to be sort of successful on paper, I suppose, as an artist. I kind of wanted to be somebody who, was well established, who made lots of sales and, kind of did all of that. And I think over time, I felt like, I kind of did tick quite a few of those boxes, like not every box, but I think establishing myself, I'm still, I wouldn't consider myself fully established as an artist, but I think ticking a lot of those boxes, making sales and kind of finding my sort of like my corner in the art market, if you like. I think I forgot about a lot of personal things in my life, and that was quite difficult. And actually my 20s were, so really the last, I'm 31 now. The last few years, my 20s, kind of mid to late 20s, they were quite difficult in a personal sense because I kind of lost sight of the fact that, my life was going on and I kind of sorted my career out in many ways. I've kind of found that, thing that I was growing, which was, my practice as an artist. But my personal life was kind of suffering. And I think now for me, success is very different. It's kind of almost flipped on its head. I think, I want to maintain what I do as an artist. I think I want to continue that and, continue reaching people, making sales and all of that. But I think for me now, success is just kind of being happy as an individual. We can't be happy all the time, but it's about being content. It's about, having, a wholesome life. And for a lot of people, that's having a job that they enjoy. But I think, sometimes it's possible to have a job that you enjoy, but you kind of forget about the other stuff, So I kind of did kind of a lot of soul searching in my late 20s. And, I kind of went through certain things and, I kind of come out the other end now. I'm in a much better position. I'm with somebody that I care about and who cares about me. And I think just being able to support each other, I think to me, that's success. And that's not to say if you don't have that, you're not successful. I'm just saying that to me is success. I've still got my job, I've still got my career that I'm continuing to work on, but I'm not really forgetting the other stuff anymore. I'm looking after myself and the people that I care about. So yeah, that's success to me that I just want to carry on with in my life.
Great answer. And Ed, I want to thank you for sharing with us your creative journey. I'm a big fan of your work and I want to wish you continued success. And lastly, where can people connect with you again?
I suppose the best place is on Instagram. So that'll be instagram.com/Ed Fairburn. Also just my website, edfairburn.com. Yeah, or just Google my name. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Listeners, make sure to check out Ed's work, connect with him. And until next time, take care, everybody, and bye.